strikes in Poland's airspace, Mr. President, Romania, the provocations that we saw in Estonia and elsewhere are the proof that all European people are also challenged by threats of Russian destabilization, and unity can thwart those. Ukraine has often said it's ready for a ceasefire and can agree to negotiations. It accepts them. It's now up to Russia to prove that it can choose peace, even at a time it's stepping up attacks against Ukrainian civilians and the provocations to which I've just referred. France is ready as we wait to stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine alongside our European partners and all those that understand that we need to hold Russia back to preserve the global order. And I welcome the proposal we saw a few hours ago from the President of the United States, recalling the gradual weakening of the Russian economy. I welcome what he said, the on-the-ground failures of Russia. In more than 1,000 days, Russia's hardly gained 1% of Ukrainian territory. There have been so much loss, so many civilian victims, and few territorial gains. I welcome the fact that the President of the USA believes in Ukraine's ability not only to hold the course, but to uphold and ensure its rights prevail with us. It's because there is this refusal of double standards that France will stand side by side with Ukraine as we do for peace in the Middle East. Yesterday, we adopted a credible plan to put an end to the war in Gaza, to preserve a two-state solution, Israel and Palestine, to allow the release of all hostages and to save so many lives. We've charted a course towards peace, which requires first and foremost that hostages still in Hamas's hands are released, that strikes on Gaza cease. And I am delighted that Saudi Arabia and France have convinced a large number of the members of this assembly to sign the New York Declaration. 142 members of this assembly have signed that declaration. We've held out our hands to forge the path towards peace, immediate peace, release of hostages, ceasefire, stabilization of Gaza, the demilitarization and dismantling of Hamas, and a reciprocal recognition of two states and a Palestinian state which is demilitarized, which recognizes Israel, an Israeli state which recognizes the state of Palestine, and all the states of the region that have not yet done so, we hope will recognize the state of Israel. Through this mutual recognition, that is in fact a path towards peace. It's also the stability of the region as a whole that we seek to build. There cannot be any security or stability for Israel if we have a permanent war being waged with its neighbors, peace with Palestine in the West Bank and in Gaza and throughout Jerusalem, peace in Lebanon. There, the struggle against terrorism cannot be waged to the detriment of sovereignty of the Lebanese people. And it's for that reason I am delighted at the work that we have undertaken hand in hand with the United States of America, with the United Nations and UNIFIL to build this path that will make it possible to restore Lebanese sovereignty, to make the Lebanese armed forces once again able with UNIFIL to really anchor their sovereignty and to build this monopoly over weapons, a monopoly that can only be held by the Lebanese armed forces. Lebanon breathes easier when Hezbollah is weaker, and the rest of Lebanon will breathe even better when all of armed caches, when all of the arms held by Hezbollah are back in the hands of the Lebanese armed forces. There's no other choice. We'll soon hold a support conference for the reconstruction of Lebanon. And we'll also support the conference that our Saudi friends will hold, supporting the Lebanese armed forces. In the same vein, Syria must recover its unity and its sovereignty. Syria is freer since Assad's regime fell. I received the transitional president in Paris. I welcomed him there. I'll see him again tomorrow. And with several states of the region, we are striving so that Syria can respect all components of its civil society, because that's where its strength lies. At the same time, it's in finding that unity once more, they will be able to also fully recover their sovereignty. The region can only be in peace if the Iranian nuclear program that has been partially destroyed is once again fully under control. It is for this reason France, Germany, the United Kingdom triggered by way of a collective agreement a process leading to the restoration of all international sanctions previously imposed upon Iran. That alone Iran alone is responsible for being in breach of its obligations, but they have decided to open the doors to the IAEA and allow them to inspect HEU stocks and to conduct inspections. The next steps to come will be decisive. Either Iran makes a gesture and goes back to the path of peace and accountability that make it possible to get back on course and for the IAEA to do its work and for stockpiles to be transferred, or sanctions will have to be imposed. I'll have an occasion to meet with the president, if needs be, tomorrow. On each of these crucial issues, France puts forward concrete proposals, solutions. The plan for the war to stop in Ukraine exists. The plan to make peace in the Middle East is on the table. A plan to put the Iranian nuclear program back under proper control exists. The plan to restore the full sovereignty of Lebanon in the south exists. We always want to be the partner of all of those who share this demand that everyone take effective action. However, there is a risk that we will stop taking action and look away from too much suffering. The humanitarian tragedy currently in Sudan is undoubtedly the biggest of those facing us today. It's up to us collectively to rally, to mobilize as we did in Paris in 2024. Let us coordinate our efforts to act together so that the warmongers accept negotiations and put power back in civilian hands. In the same way, in the Great Lakes region, the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Democratic Republic of the Congo must be upheld. We need to return hope to the people of Kivu and to the hundreds of thousands of people that have been displaced. And it is also for that reason and it's also for that reason that we will meet next month in Paris, all of those able to respond to the humanitarian urgency and bring together initiatives of peace. And I'm delighted at what's been done by the African Union, by so many neighbors, Qatar, USA, but the humanitarian emergency needs to be addressed. We cannot forget any of these conflicts. We have no right at any time to lose heart. This capacity to take a leap of action is our source of strength. That's what brought us together 80 years ago. We have no right to get tired, to show fatigue. Well, there are so many crises, one after the other. I'm quite clear-sighted alongside you when I look at today's world. Everywhere, we see the risks of proliferation once again return, and new threats emerge. There is an urgent need to rebuild a credible framework, a verifiable framework to combat any nuclear proliferation, to rebuild a credible framework to once again contain these threats, ballistic proliferation. I'm not forgetting bacteriological, chemical threats, or the new risks that posed by AI, cyber technology, space technology, quantum technology. We have common frameworks, but they've been weakened in all of these domains in recent years, sometimes because some people sort of said they were outdated, and sometimes because the rules for verification weren't properly observed, sometimes because the pace of technological development meant that these frameworks, their capacity to innovate, was not enough. Technological change was going too quick. However, we've got no right to give up. Ours is, we have to build that crucial framework for peace. The same demand for effectiveness, effective multilateralism is one that we need to uphold for our global challenges. The Secretary General attaches great importance to our organization, and he has ambition for it, and that's shown through his initiative UN80. And I share his concerns about our organization. Yes, we need, at this time of disarray that I talked about as a result of these major issues of war and conflict, we can't forget there are so many global challenges that mean that we must all come together. Let us stare straight in the face global imbalances, all economies affected, all economies, and I'm speaking as one of the richest among them, but also middle income countries, developing countries, and of course the poorest nations among us, all of us, if we can't have organized international debate on major global imbalances, if our response is a fragmented one and we don't work together, we exacerbate these problems. Today, our challenge is to look at how we can help China to develop the internal demand that it really needs. How can we ensure that productive capacities that China's been able to develop in recent years, these technological capacity, sometimes there's technological transfer and that's good, but they need to be conducted hand in hand with harmonious development and respectfully the environment. How can we correct US trade imbalances? How can we do that through corrective measures, not through tariffs that takes the rug out from under international trade? There's Europe that needs to respond to collective needs for collective investment, and we need to shoulder that responsibility. These challenges mean that we need to cooperate. There needs to be cooperation between major economies, but we can't pit the G7 against the BRICS. And that's the very rationale behind our agenda for the French G7 of 2026. Of course, we'll work with the Canadian presidency of G7 and the coming presidents of G20. We need to return to that spirit of cooperation that is vital, because that's what will allow us also to have a common agenda to finance our global challenges. Let's take a look at things today. Everywhere, we're reducing, eroding our common ambitions to finance major global challenges. Collective financing for healthcare is plummeting, as is financing for food security, as is financing for education. These challenges are, however, our challenges, even more than they were before the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. And so it is absolutely pivotal that together we prove ourselves able to develop concrete solutions and find new financing to address our challenges. The European Union decided to mobilize. The Commission's president's speech was great in this connection. We are mobilizing financing as Europeans to meet these challenges, but we must do so within a renewed framework. That's what we tried to do together during the pandemic itself with our African partners, during the financing summit, which we held in 2021. The work we did there was work we continued at the 4P summit, where we developed this pact for the prosperity of peoples and the planet. Ultimately, the agendas were the same. Together, we need to work together better to address global economic imbalances. We must develop an agenda of growth everywhere, but we must do that to also help countries to finance education, healthcare, stabilization and food security, and help them to address challenges of biodiversity and the climate. Let us come off the horns of a dilemma. We don't need to choose between growth, climate change, and biodiversity. We can do everything if we mobilize private and public financing within a framework that brings together, reconciles east, west, north, and south. That's the framework we've built. And now what we need to do is expedite the transition that's already underway. And I thank you all. The heads of the World Bank, the IMF, have commented on these efforts, but we need to go faster. The frameworks we developed have already become obsolete. We need to mobilize more private financing to accompany transitions in middle-income countries, developing countries, and the poorest nations. We must develop guarantee mechanisms that losses will be covered, and we need to mobilize more private financing to help those countries and help them to grow. That is vital if we want to avoid crises, destabilization tomorrow. This agenda is an agenda which brings us together and in some way forces some people to cast aside selfishness and avoid a situation whereby others are alone facing their challenges. It is for that reason we must also continue. Whatever the ill winds that blow, continue to mobilize to stop biodiversity loss and help the climate. As I was saying, together we were able to notch up victories recently. The Nice Treaty that entered into force through collective rallying, we finally have a regulation framework for our oceans. That was something we've been waiting for decades. The same collective mobilization is what we must see on plastic. We need to develop an international treaty that aims to put an end to plastic pollution. The same mobilization is what we need to have to mobilize biodiversity credits and give more consistency to our carbon credits. This same rallying needs to be seen as we move towards the Berlin COP. France and Europe will be at that meeting, and we will be in step with the 2030 goals. We will mobilize all financing necessary to usher in this transition, whether that be public or private financing. We have no right to turn away, stray from the course towards the goals we set ourselves. We have no right to simply crumble and become isolated. As you've seen, all of these global challenges, education, healthcare, agriculture, food security, biodiversity, climate, the fight ultimately against all inequalities that destabilize our global order require the same spirit of cooperation, the same spirit that I talked about, the spirit we showed in the face of war and destabilization. Our challenge is the fact that crises, there's a plethora of them, they're growing in number. My speech was long and quite comprehensive, but I do reassure you I'm coming to an end. But I forcefully say to you once more, in spite of all that, in spite of the long list that sometimes gives the impression that we might be overwhelmed, our duty is to remain on our feet and to continue to act together. 80 years ago, those that preceded us were facing collapse. The war hadn't finished. The worst had just come to pass. A world already divided was kind of stuttering, and it was up to them to build the treasure that is the United Nations. We could overwhelm our assembly, level criticism against it, reproach it for everything. Not all reproaches are fair, some are. This assembly is us. If it's ineffective, it's because some people are blocking it. Sometimes it's the most powerful. If it's not going fast enough, it's because people don't have enough resolve to make things move forward. The United Nations is all of us. There's one thing. It's that we don't have a right to be cynical. We don't have the right to get fatigued. We can't have this defeated heart, because our world is here before us, and our risk, the risk that we face, is that of fragmentation, that the law might is right will prevail, the status quo prevailing, cynicism, and to some extent that we will lose control. Yes, the loss of control. That's what all of our peoples are experiencing. Fear in the face of a future they no longer control. The fear in the face of migrations that they're weathering, a climate that we can no longer control, fear of inequalities that we can't bring under control, a fear in the face of a war we can't stop. This fear has one friend, the strongest friend, the mightiest person that was able to prevail, the cynic that was allowed to prevail. We have one responsibility, that is to act together, build this multilateralism once again with the same faith, with the same resolve as the founding fathers of this assembly. We need to do that with even more effectiveness, but with the same will. We cannot give ground to injustice. We can give nothing to fatality or the sense of the inevitable. We need to act, and act. So it's up to us to do just that together. I thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the French Republic. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Shadia Zaparov, President of the Kyrgyz Republic. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Madam President, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished heads of delegations, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to sincerely congratulate Ms. Annalena Baerbock on her election as the President of the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly and to wish her every success in her work. This year, we mark the 80th anniversary of the UN, a unique institution that has stood guard over peace, security, and development for nearly a century. Over these 80 years, despite numerous conflicts, the world has fortunately been spared the outbreak of a third world war. The United Nations has undoubtedly played a key role in this achievement. The organization has become not only an international platform for dialogue, but also played a special role in preventing global conflicts. Today, the trend of regionalism in world politics is strengthening. We are witnessing continued price hikes, a shortage of liquidity, and a war of sanctions in the global economy. The threat of terrorism and extremism has spread across all countries. Despite criticism, the UN remains the only truly universal organization endowed with both moral authority and institutional capacity. Today, Kyrgyzstan takes pride in the political stability it has achieved and in the ongoing social and economic transformation. These achievements did not come easily to us. For us, the price of attaining freedom and independence was very high. But I can state one thing with confidence. We have been able to establish Kyrgyzstan as a state. This achievement allows us to set ambitious goals for the future. International organizations, including the UN, recognize Kyrgyzstan as one of the freest and most stable states on the Eurasian continent with a strong civil society. A large-scale and irreversible fight against corruption and crime is considered a priority area of state policy in Kyrgyzstan. Today, our task is to pursue political modernization and economic development in line with the demands of tomorrow. We are committed to improving the investment climate, building an information society, and establishing fair and transparent public governance. Ladies and gentlemen, every year in New York, leaders of all world's nations gather to once again remind themselves and each other of the great mission for which UN was created. I too have come to New York with this mission. Today, my diplomatic staff have prepared a polite text that takes into account the international diplomatic situation. However, this year, standing at this high podium, I decided not to speak as a diplomat. This year, from this podium, I wish to speak not only as the head of state, but as an ordinary person and a citizen of my country, openly expressing my true thoughts and reflections on the international events happening in the world. This year marks the fourth time I am delivering a speech at the UN General Assembly. For 3 consecutive years, I came here and delivered pleasant, beautiful words. But today, I have decided to speak openly and directly about the problems that trouble the hearts of millions of people. In different parts of the world, in Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia, new armed conflicts and wars are erupting. Millions of people losing their homes are forced to abandon their native lands, and millions become victims. Who suffers the most? First and foremost, ordinary people. We cannot turn a blind eye to the suffering of many peoples. Palestine, Ukraine, Sudan, Syria, and others where hostilities continue. Civilians are dying and human rights are being violated. The world community, applying double standards, prioritizes these conflicts as more or less important, depending on its own geopolitical interests. The conflict in Ukraine has lasted nearly 4 years, with people continuing to die and flee their country. We support the efforts of US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin to seek solutions for a peaceful settlement of conflict in Ukraine. We are interested in this outcome because we too are suffering from the consequences of Russian-Ukraine conflict. Unilateral sanctions negatively affect us as well, a country that is only just getting back on its feet. Kyrgyzstan is making every effort to strengthen its economy independently. Therefore, we view unjustified sanctions as interference in our internal affairs and as pressure that hinders the development of our still forming economy. I have always said, I will say again, Kyrgyzstan has strictly fulfilled and will continue to fulfill its international obligations. However, we cannot sacrifice the interests of our citizens and the economic development of our country. The sanctions imposed on Kyrgyzstan are based on false information spread by certain non-governmental organizations and dishonest people. We are ready to accept independent international audits to thoroughly review the activities of Kyrgyzstan's banks. In 2024, EU countries traded with Russia to the amount of $141 billion, of which 36 billion was Russian imports. and the UK, which imposed sanctions on two of our banks the same year, traded with Russia for $2.2 billion. Frankly speaking, some keep the option of cooperating with Russia in defense of their own interest, but forbid others from doing the same. How should this phenomenon be called? Before demanding something from others, be an example to them, to yourself. You demand from us not to cooperate with Russia, yet you yourselves are cooperating extensively. We, in fact, have far deeper economic relations with Russia than you do. Therefore, economically speaking, we cannot refuse cooperation with Russia. We do not seek confrontation with others. We cooperate with virtually the entire world, pursuing a multi-vector foreign policy. For example, every year we sell gold worth of $1 billion to the UK alone. My foremost duty as the president of the country is to ensure the security of my citizens and my nation, and to improve their economic well-being. We oppose the politicization of economic cooperation and trade. Therefore, we demand the lifting of sanctions against two of our banks. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the UN Secretary General has already described the Gaza Strip as a graveyard of thousands of children. More is needed to stop the war and the horrific events in Gaza. We must empathize with Palestinian people who have suffered enormous losses as a result of inhuman conflict in the Gaza Strip. We must not remain indifferent to the human tragedy unfolding before the whole world. We demand an end to genocide against the Palestinians and the commencement of international judicial investigation by the UN International Court of Justice. My country has always firmly condemned violence and terrorism in all their forms, including the terrorist attacks on Israel on the 7th of October, 2023. Such terrorists must be punished harshly. However, the fight against terrorism and the methods used to eliminate terrorists have their own rules and procedures. Those methods must be used. Because of actions of such terrorists, millions of ordinary civilians should not perish. Why do we allow the mass deaths of ordinary people and innocent children by the hundreds of thousands? The only way to establish a lasting peace is to implement the principle of two states for two people. Palestine must gain independence based on 1967 borders. We also condemn the recent rocket strikes on the territories of Qatar and Iran, since such attacks infringe on the sovereignty of independent states, create threats to regional stability and security, and run counter to the norms of international law. The fight against terrorism and modern threats in Gaza, Iran, Lebanon, and other regions must be proportionate to their scale and nature. Civilians, women, and children must not suffer and be sacrificed. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as a neighboring country, Kyrgyzstan considers it important, especially in these difficult times, to provide comprehensive support to the Afghan people by integrating Afghanistan's economy into the regional and global economic processes. To isolate Afghanistan at the international level and deprive it of foreign assistance is wrong. It is unjust. We believe that the use of financial instruments for geopolitical and ideological gain, thereby deepening the humanitarian crisis, is an act of injustice and inhumanity. Therefore, we are convinced that the assets of Afghanistan frozen by Western countries in the amount of $9 billion US must be returned to the Afghan people as soon as possible. These funds could contribute to the restoration of infrastructure, expansion of access to credit through local banks, the development of agriculture, and the creation of new opportunities for millions of people living in poverty. According to the UN data, in 2025, 15 million people in Afghanistan faced hunger and 24 million required humanitarian assistance. As we all know, at the beginning of September, more than 2,000 of our Afghan brothers lost their lives as a result of an earthquake. Tragically, due to lack of financial resources and weak infrastructure, timely assistance could not be provided to those affected. We call upon the leaders of Western countries to immediately return these assets for the sake of future of the Afghan people. If you truly want the Afghan people to overcome poverty, hunger as soon as possible, return them without delay. Only then will your words about human rights and interstate obligations correspond to your actions. Distinguished participants, today's challenges in African countries, from conflicts to food insecurity, require not sympathy in words, but solidarity in action. Africa is 54 countries with a population of more than 1.5 billion people. It is the second largest continent after Eurasia. Africa possesses enormous reserves of resources, and we are confident that in the near future, Africa's role in the global economy and international politics will multiply several times. Therefore, the continent's colossal natural wealth must serve the accelerated development of Africa itself and the fulfillment of its own interests. The peacekeeping work of the UN must be strengthened. My country began sending its peacekeepers on UN missions at the dawn of its independence in the early 1990s. This once again proves that we are sincerely wish to contribute to the cause of strengthening peace and security in the world. The contribution of a state should not be determined by its size, but by the depth of its commitment and sincere desire for peace and solidarity. We support the strengthening of international treaties, including the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. It is important to educate the younger generation to perceive a world without nuclear weapons. It is essential to raise awareness among young people about the devastating consequences of weapons of mass destruction. The International Day for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation Awareness, initiated by Kyrgyzstan and supported by the UN member states, is an excellent platform for implementing this concept. Kyrgyzstan is one of the initiators and the depository of Treaty on Nuclear Weapon-Free Zones in Central Asia. We have acceded to all fundamental international instruments on disarmament and non-proliferation, including the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. In line with the principles of consistency, this year the Kyrgyz Republic made the political decision to sign the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. We firmly believe that our planet must exist without nuclear weapons. This human invention must be used solely for peaceful purposes. Ladies and gentlemen, for sustainable development and regional integration, the countries of Central Asia require equal dialogue and active cooperation. Despite complex historical and geographic factors, Kyrgyzstan has peacefully resolved its border issues with neighboring countries, in particular Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. This process involved lengthy negotiations and at high political levels, expert levels, and was resolved with due respect for the interests of all sides. I can state with confidence that today the borders between Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan are borders of friendship, trade, and cooperation. This experience confirms that peace is possible where there is political will, respect, and dialogue, which enabled us to resolve existing contradictions and embark on a path of creation and development. Kyrgyzstan is ready to share this experience of resolving complex issues with the international community. Let us use the more than $3 trillion that are spent annually on armaments worldwide to improve people's lives, eradicate hunger, protect our environment, and clean the air. After all, there are no borders when it comes to breathing air. We all breathe the same air. Therefore, I call on us to live not in a race for who has the most powerful weapons, but in a competition for whose country has the cleanest nature and air. Dear friends, climate change is a reality we are witnessing today. We face threats of drought, melting glaciers, changes in ecosystems, and loss of biodiversity. Kyrgyzstan, as a mountainous country, is particularly vulnerable to these changes. We are already experiencing the threat of declining water resources and risks to agriculture and biodiversity. Although Kyrgyzstan is landlocked, it actively participates in international environmental initiatives and can play a significant role in supporting agreements aimed at protecting global ecosystems. The Kyrgyz Republic consistently advocates for recognition of the interconnection of natural systems from mountains to oceans, which are two poles of a single system. The future of the oceans begin on the mountaintops. In this context, we ratified the agreement on conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity and became among the first 60 plus countries to join the agreement. Rivers that sustain marine and coastal ecosystems originate in mountains. Thus, the protection of mountain ecosystems and the sustainable management of the oceans are interconnected. At present, the country is preparing the second Bishkek Plus 25 summit, scheduled for 2027, as a central platform for states, international organizations, and experts on sustainable development of mountain regions. We invite all of you to take an active part in this event. Dear friends, as former UN General Secretary Dag Hammarskjöld once aptly said, the UN was not created to lead humanity to heaven, but to save humanity from hell. Today, these words are more relevant than ever. The organization was born from the horrors of war, but lives and on thanks to faith in cooperation, dialogue, and respect. Now, Now, more than ever, it is important to preserve and strengthen the system of multilateralism as a shield against anarchy and unilateral decisions. There is an urgent need to develop fundamentally new international mechanisms that adequately respond to contemporary challenges and threats. Our organization needs to change. This is no longer a choice, but a requirement of time and today's realities. In this context, we support the effort of the Secretary General to reform the UN under the initiative UN 80. It is also time to improve the reform work of the UN Security Council. At present, 50 members of the Security Council effectively decide the fate of all world's states. Questions of war and peace, security and stability depend on whether they can reach a consolidated position. Moreover, the 5 permanent members of the Security Council can always block any decision. Kyrgyzstan advocates for a necessary measure to improve the UN Security Council in a way that takes into account the interests of majority of states. In this regard, it is important to achieve a compromise on all aspects of Security Council reform as soon as possible. This reform must be based on principles of universality, broad geographical representation, and wide support among UN member states. Kyrgyzstan considers it legitimate and fair to expand the rights of African states to membership in the Security Council and to eliminate historical imbalances. More than 60 member states, including Kyrgyzstan, have never been elected to the Security Council, while some countries have been elected 5 or 6 times. We think it's not fair. Distinguished delegates, Kyrgyzstan strives to make its contribution to peace, global security, and sustainable development. In order to draw the attention of the UN and the world to the challenges faced by small states, Kyrgyzstan has put forward its candidacy for non-permanent membership in the UN Security Council for the period 2027-2028. The support of countries that have never been elected to this Security Council will strengthen confidence in equality among members and thereby raise the authority of organization and reinforce trust in it. We sincerely believe in the principle of justice, and I ask UN member states to support us in the elections in June next year. Every country should have the opportunity to serve as a member of the Council and contribute to the cause of maintaining peace and security. I can confidently say that Kyrgyzstan is among those states with the experience needed to raise meaningful issues in the Security Council. We will firmly uphold international law, justice, the protection of human rights, and support the multilateral system based on mutual respect, balance of interest, and responsibility to future generations. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, our challenges are shared, and our responses must be united. Our words must match our deeds. We cannot afford inaction. Peace requires effort. The future of our planet is in our shared responsibility. Thank you very much for your attention.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Kyrgyz Republic. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Gustavo Petro Orrego, President of the Republic of Colombia. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
President of the General Assembly, this is my last statement as president here. It's the fourth time. In my first speech, I announced that it was very likely that there would be conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza and in Palestine, and that I suggested that there be a peace conference. But those who don't have bombs or large budgets are not heated here. Well, 4 years later, the horrific situation in Palestine did not lead me to think that almost the same thing could happen in the Colombian Caribbean area, where unarmed young people are being shot at with missiles in the open seas. And now we are in a different situation. Perhaps it's more global, a kind of Stone Age that has descended on all of humankind. Missiles against 17 unarmed young people in the Caribbean Sea, some of them Colombians. The persecution, imprisonment, and expulsion of millions of migrants, missiles that have killed some 70,000 people in Gaza, the lack of action on the climate crisis. All this is linked, and all this has the same cause. Migration is simply an excuse so that a rich society, rich, white, and racist, believes itself to be the superior race and is not realizing that its leaders are leading it to the abyss, to its own distinction, together with the rest of humanity. They said that the missiles in the Caribbean were used to stop drug trafficking. That is a lie. Stated here in this very rostrum. In 2023 and 2024 were years when the largest amount of cocaine was seized, and over 700 drug traffickers were extradited to the United States in Europe. I extradited them. And my government confiscated the cocaine, and we didn't shoot a single missile, nor did we kill any youths. The years where I was able to prove that it's more effective to substitute coca crops than eradicate them, than forced eradication using poison, and forcing peasants to use it. The violent war against drugs was a failure, and I replaced it with an effective anti-trafficking policy, not based on a mix-up between an inert substance, that is drugs, with people who actually use it and practice it. But what was necessary is to destroy dialogue and to shoot missiles. Was it really necessary on unarmed, poor young people in the Caribbean? The anti-drug policy is not meant to stop cocaine that is coming to the United States. The anti-drug policy is to dominate the peoples of the South as a whole. You shouldn't look at the drugs, you should look at who has the power and who dominates. This is why I speak to you as a decertified president. I've been decertified by President Trump, without him having any right to do this, a human right or divine right or any sensible reason. They want to force by violence tens of thousands of peasants to do what the U.S. government wants to do, which are influenced by mafia groups in Colombia. Thousands of peasants are massacred in Colombia by politicians who were senators, who were presidents, who were ministers that were bribed and on the payroll of the drug mafia. And at the same time, they were allies of the extreme right based in Florida of the United States, and now allies of the Trump administration. They've been allied for decades with drug lords, cocaine drug lords in Colombia. They were allies, and so they led this anti-drug policy from Washington. I don't know if Trump even knows that his foreign policy towards Colombia, Venezuela, and towards the Caribbean is based on advice from Colombians who are allies of the cocaine mafia. I myself denounced these politicians, including the paramilitaries, drug traffickers, and naming them by their names in the Congress of Colombia when I was senator. And many times they wanted to kill me because of that. And they did not want me to become president. They wanted me to shut up. And now they don't want another progressive government to be reelected. That is why I've been personally decertified, and they have spread calumny against Colombia. Colombia has confiscated the highest amount of cocaine in the history of the country under my government, and I've been decertified. In Colombia, we have managed to stop the increase in the rate of expansion of coca crops that was 43% under the government of Duque and has dropped to 3%. And Duque was not decertified. He was who had someone who financed his campaign who was a drug trafficker, and instead they've decertified me. So the anti-drug policy is not aimed at the public health of a society, but rather to prop up a policy of domination. They don't want to give the power to the people. The young people that were killed using missiles in the Caribbean were not from Hamas. They were not from other terrorist groups. They were poor Colombians. And with apologies to those who dominate the United Nations, there should be criminal cases against those officials of the United States for doing this, including the utmost official, President Trump, that allowed the shooting of missiles against these young people who were simply trying to escape poverty. Youths who in a speedboat who might have had a certain amount of drugs were not drug traffickers. They were simply poor youth. But the real drug traffickers live somewhere else, not in America, not in Latin America. So it's easy to shoot missiles against the speedboats with migrants and accusing them of terrorism and drug trafficking when they don't have a single weapon to defend themselves. When the real drug traffickers live in New York, here, just a few blocks from here, in Miami. And they reach agreements with the DEA, and they're allowed to traffic in Africa, in Russia, in China, but not in the United States, a country that has not managed to reduce its consumption of cocaine because it's drug addicts, or rather, they did manage to reduce the consumption of cocaine simply because their addicts switched to another type of drug, fentanyl, which is much deadlier. This fentanyl is produced in the industrial heartland of the United States, here, not far from here. And the consumers are here as well. It's produced and consumed in the United States. That is the worst. addicted to fentanyl and to gasoline, the two main poisons of life in the world. Gasoline is even worse than fentanyl. Only the black-skinned people here, those who are ancestral here, that were thousands of years have been here, or young people, or women who don't want to see their children die of any color of their skin. The people are still hooked on fentanyl or hooked on television. Only they can stop this domination by the United States. The people who have taken to the streets in California, in New York, in Philadelphia, where the Liberty Bell stands, in spite of the National Guard that Trump sends out against its own people to shut them up, to the states that are free. These states are no longer uniting their efforts in the face of tyranny. The President of the United States does not know that 1 million Latin Americans have died. The largest share of them from Colombia. And another 1 million will die in North America in 10 years because of fentanyl. Cocaine killed 3,000 people a year. Today, fentanyl kills 130 per year, 30 times more. That is the outcome of 30 years by the United States of a policy that is absurd and that is leading its society to the horrific death due to drugs that kill the brain. And in this situation, Trump not only allows missiles to be fired at young people in the Caribbean, does not only imprison migrants, but also allows missiles to be killed against children, women, and old people in Gaza. He is an accomplice to genocide. It is a genocide, and we need to prevent it. This forum is a mute witness to a genocide. In a world where we thought that this was something only a legacy of Hitler. Here they don't speak of life, of the climate crisis. What is happening is the death of thousands of children. Meanwhile, we in Colombia have not increased the rate of killings. We have the lowest unemployment rate in the country this century. We have the lowest unemployment rates. We have developed our agriculture by 10% and our industry by 5%. We have more tourists than ever who have come to see the beauties of our country, our cultural and natural beauties. And we are seeking peace by negotiating with drug traffickers and with rebels. I will always be ready to discuss, to negotiate, to save lives, and to eradicate coca crops, but based on their own voluntary decision by Colombian peasants. Let us not be bribed by the drug traffickers, as was the case in previous governments in Colombia. And 25,000 hectares have already been eradicated voluntarily. We have been successful in this new policy. It's not an anti-drug policy, but an anti-drug traffickers policy. That is something different. And we're grateful to the countries that have helped us, such as Qatar, Cuba, Mexico, Vatican, Norway, Brazil, and Venezuela. We don't want to thank those who want to sow war between us. People of the world, listen. Latin America does not only mean drug trafficking or coke or cocaine. Latin America has a massive, massive potential for clean electrical energy, renewable alternate energy based on wind, water. The United States has a huge demand for energy, and 70% of it is filled by fossil fuels, in other words, based on carbon, or coal, gas. Latin America is developing its clean energy potential, and we can satisfy the entire demand of the United States for energy. What is necessary is investment, and we would make the biggest contribution to fighting climate change. Given the huge potential for clean energy and the capacity to absorb by the Amazon, Latin America can make a tremendous contribution to save the life in this planet. All that is necessary is $600 billion to develop this potential. Africa and Europe can do the same. It is this decarbonization would provide us with over $1.3 trillion. This is money that is already in the treasuries of the United States, Europe, China, but not a dollar is spent because it's not profitable, or rather, it might be profitable in terms of human life, including life in the United States, in Europe, and China. However, they don't want to depend on Latin America and Africa. They know that to bring together the clean energy of Africa and Latin America would not only decarbonize the planet, save it from the climate collapse, but it would also change the global power of which is discussed here. But that power is spoken in terms of bombs. But this would truly create a global democracy and change the means of production, because life and humanity would become the priorities, and they would edge out greed. Greed is the poison of life, and Mao spoke of this. Chairman Mao. According to science, we have 10 more years until we reach a point of no return in terms of the climate. And once we reach that point, we won't be able to do anything. We will simply observe the disasters, and we'll feel them in our own families and cities. Because it will be irreversible. The extinction of life, extinction of human life there'll be an irreversibility of the process, and no technology, no political or social force will be able to do anything about it to stop this collapse. And we only have 10 years left. That is what science tells us. But here people don't believe in science. The most powerful man in the world does not believe in science. That is the irrationality. And Germany, the country of great philosophers, of Kant, Feuerbach, and others, became prey of irrationalism in 1933, and today it's this country that is becoming irrational. The solution is to stop consuming fossil fuels and to quickly switch to water, wind, hydrogen. But the word decarbonization sounds subversive at the conferences of the most powerful countries, the G7 or G20 or Davos, among the rich. Just as 5 centuries ago, the word democracy sounded subversive here, or in Bogota, and in Paris, and in Madrid. These dollars that I mentioned here, 600 billion or 1.3 trillion. This is significant. This is just a little more than what the rich countries pledged at the COP in Paris, and they have not fulfilled their pledges because they are not interested in decarbonization. And the what has come is basically loans from multilateral banks, which are just um, small amounts compared to what is needed. The climate crisis means that in all public budgets, investment in decarbonization and adaptation should be the priority. A global financial policy is necessary that is different. The debt risk premium should be abolished. Which countries are the riskiest? They are the countries that have the highest greenhouse gas emissions, such as this one. These are the riskiest countries, whereas the countries that absorb CO2, and we have jungles and a lot of water in the south. We absorb the CO2 of the north, but the market does not agree with that. So the debt of the poorest countries must be forgiven. There should be swaps, debt swaps for adaptation and mitigation and investment in the climate crisis. So people from the United States and those from Wall Street, from London, you want to collect the interest payments from the debt of our countries. What you will find eventually is cemeteries, because we'll all be dead. The money will be useless in the midst of all the cemeteries. Another subversive word is to plan. A global plan. The word plan has been forgotten because it was not necessary to plan, because to plan is anathema. And there was a fundamentalist belief in the markets, thinking that markets would bring happiness. The Swiss economist Arras said this. And in fact, the market abyss, it leads to death, as we are already witnessing today. Malras, that was his name, was wrong. Neoliberalism was mistaken from the very beginning, and it's been guiding our countries for the past 50 years based on completely erroneous formulas. The plans should be binding on national states. There should be a global democracy supervised by a Security Council that does not have the right to veto. Because we have to understand that the market will not resolve the climate crisis, because it has produced that crisis. It was capital, which is based on unequal relationship between those who own the means that create the carbon and those who work, who are salaried employees. And this is a system that has to produce more and more objects that the boss, the owner, has to sell. And the same thing for the production of fossil fuel. has produced the climate crisis, produce more, to consume more, to sell more, and thus create more carbon, more oil until we die. But this will not last forever, because carbon and fossil fuels have reached the end, because that is perhaps will mean the end of capital in general, because if it's not the end of capital, it'll be the end of life. The owner of capital is an individual that has power. It's not a thing. It's not some kind of puppet. It is a human being with his greed, a slave to his greed. That is the individual who will seek to make sure that more and more oil is produced in their countries, even if it poisons his life, and continue to dig for more oil, even if it destroys the atmosphere and destroys life. So we have to choose either life or greed, either the Stone Age or local and global democracy, freedom or death, as Bolivar said. And that was his slogan, his red and black, white and white banner. Freedom red, death black, and possible peace white. That is what is necessary, is a revolution by the peoples of the world to overcome the climate crisis, and not to allow this crisis to reach a global collapse. It is a revolution of the united peoples, of civilizations that need to engage in dialogue more than states themselves. It is a revolution of entire humanity to save life on the planet, and perhaps with the cooperation of certain governments that want to support life. Today, the United Nations is experiencing a crisis, and there's a need to transform it. Today, we have nation states gathered here who no longer have power, and that no matter how much they vote, they are ignored, because the nation state has also reached its decadence, its ultimate fall, because capital has become global. It's not contained in a state. Socialism was supposed to be global, but Stalin, in fact, in Yalta, condemned a global revolution that was occurring in Spain and in Greece, and it might have occurred in Latin America and other places. So humanity is a new political subject that has emerged rather than the nation state. And so the United Nations has to become a united humanity, even though a diverse but united humanity. A new subject is appearing in human history, and this is very important. I think that this is wonderful, because we have to overcome the idea of a nation state to become humanity, but that humanity must be united. For that, there needs to be democracy around the world. There needs to be permanent dialogue in the midst of diversity. It is our differences that compels us to coordinate our action at the global level. Dialogue, yes. Humanity, yes. Humanity profoundly democratic, yes. Hopefully, a humanity of based on leaders who are free, rather than a humanity that is basically slaves, just to beasts of burden. A humanity that shoots missiles against young people, are defenseless armed people, or shoots missiles in a place of the world near where Jesus was born. These problems cannot be resolved with governments who are bribed by oil producers, by oil corporations. So a new political subject is emerging, a united and diverse humanity, united despite its diverse cultures. Meanwhile, the old societies of Europe are collapsing, and the United States is applauding its new Hitler. They're not. It's not listening to its own young people or its older people who died in Europe in the battlefields of Europe, fighting against Hitler and against his criminal ideology. Today, the same thing is being done as Hitler did, building concentration camps for migrants. And it's stated that migrants are of an inferior race, and they blame them, just like Hitler blamed the Jews. They call them drug traffickers and thieves, whereas the majority of drug traffickers are blonde and have blue eyes, and they keep their fortunes in the largest banks in the world, and they don't live in Bogota or in Gaza. They live in Miami. They are neighbors of President Trump. They live in Dubai or in Paris or London. They don't live where there's poverty. But the missiles are fired against those where there's poverty. Tren de Aragua is a group that is considered a terrorist group, but that is not true. Migrants are not criminals. They should not be put in concentration camps, expelled and chained up. Immigration is not immigration is due to a blockade against countries like Iraq or Cuba. Immigration is a result of the impoverishment of many countries because of their indebtedness, because of wars, unleashed by the United States and Europe to grab their oil. Immigration is a consequence of a climate crisis that leaves the tropics without water and destroys the environment. The solution to migration is very different from missiles or prisons or camps. There is no higher race. There's no supreme race. Only ignorant extremists think like that. All of humanity is made in God's image. They use immigration as a scapegoat to do nothing against the climate crisis, which will put an end to life. They use immigration to get the votes of the whites, but what is necessary is to put an end to the consumption of CO2 and oil, and stop drilling and drilling and drilling for oil. We need a different world, a humane world. And first and foremost, we need to stop the genocide in Gaza. Humanity cannot allow a single day more of this genocide, or for the genocidal Netanyahu and his allies in Europe and the United States to continue. The United Nations must uphold the decisions of the International Court of Justice. International law is the basis of civilization and of its wisdom as distilled in history, and it must make sure that the decisions of international justice are implemented, are applied. Diplomacy has been tried in Gaza. It could not resolve the situation. I'm sorry, and I'm sorry, President Macron. We can keep insisting and insisting when every single day, every single minute, a missile is fired and destroys the bodies of babies and children in the Arab state of Palestine. Every day, there are decisions, resolutions that are vetoed in the Security Council. Every day, more and more children die, more and more bombs, more and more dead. Perhaps those who do this, who shoot this, are robots. Maybe they don't have their own children. They're not human. Can we stop the genocide with a vote, the General Assembly? Yes, that's what we should do rather than a vote in the Security Council, because that is vetoed. United for peace for Palestine. We should establish a peacekeeping force to protect. What's necessary today are words, not blue helmets that are often lack training, and they're not ready to do this. No, what we need is a powerful army of countries that do not accept genocide. That is why I invite nations of the world and their peoples, most importantly, as a integral part of humanity, to bring together weapons and armies and to defend Palestine. I invite the armies of Asia and the brave people, the brave Slavic people who defeated Hitler, and the Latin American people of Bolivar, of Garibaldi, and others. I think there's enough. We've had enough words. Today, the time has come to use the slogan of Bolivar: "Freedom or death," because Washington and NATO are killing democracy, and they are spreading totalitarianism at the global level. We need to raise the red and black banner flag. Without forgetting the white color, which was the color of peace and the color of hope in the heart of humanity. The United States no longer teach democracy, but rather kill democracy, especially among its immigrants, filled with greed. The UN should begin its change by stopping the genocide in Gaza with a army of liberation and salvation, and there should be a decision here taken in the General Assembly without any veto. After Gaza, we can start working on decarbonization so that we can found a truly global democracy, and a new Security Council can be established without any vetoes, and where its decisions would be binding, and the global and national financial system should be based on decentralized capital. That is the way that humankind can regulate capital, to subordinate capital to life, to regulate it to people. That is the path by which the United Nations will move from an alliance of states to an alliance of cultures and peoples. If we overcome the climate crisis, and if we unite as humanity, we will manage to make the United Nations an assembly of peoples, which seeks to make sure that every individual is free, making sure that every human being achieves their potential, and because the intelligence of human beings, illuminated by science, will make it possible to not only save life, but to fulfill the mission of humanity by expanding life into the stars. A humanity that is united and free can look at the stars and reach the stars, as the Romans, the legionnaires, thought of Judea when they used the word astra or star. It's the time of freedom or death. Real death from missiles, but freedom is also real in the heart of human beings and its capacity to rebel and to resist. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Colombia. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Karol Nawrocki, President of the Republic of Poland. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, I like and appreciate a lot English language, but I love Polish language, which epitomizes more than 1,000 years of Polish heritage, Polish culture, and Polish history. So I would like to share with you Polish language. Szanowny
Distinguished Mr. President, Your Excellencies, esteemed delegates, I'm standing here for the first time as President of the Republic of Poland. And of course, I feel great proud because of this. But at the same time, I'm aware of what serious challenges we are facing today as an international community. This is indeed so, for the world has changed completely over the last couple of years since the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. On February the 24th, 2022, we were brutally, all of us, awakened from our blissful dream of a world at the end of history. The history did not finish, and the history will not finish, and we need to be aware of that. So we were awakened from our blissful dream in which we strive for universal peace and respect for the principles of international law. I believe these are the words which are repeated more frequently in this community. This dream, ladies and gentlemen, does no longer exist, and we often repeat the words which do not reflect reality which surrounds us, both in Central Europe, in Eastern Europe, and in many other regions of the world from which you have come. State borders have ceased to be untouchable, as a matter of fact, and international law, which has so far been considered the compass of the world order, began to be treated more as a suggestion rather than a rule. Let me remind you that shortly after the outbreak of the war and the attack of the Russian Federation on Ukraine, Polish men and women demonstrated incredible solidarity with the fighting Ukrainian nation. We opened our hearts, our borders, we opened up our homes. We provided material, financial, and military assistance, as well as diplomatic one. Today, ladies and gentlemen, 1 million Ukrainian refugees live in Poland. Ladies and gentlemen, the Russian invasion of Ukraine is not only the most serious conflict in Europe since World War II, but it is also a turning point. The existing international order is crumbling before our eyes. The world has entered a new and dangerous era of rivalry between great powers, breaking rules and testing how far one can go before someone says a clear enough stop. The principle of sovereignty, you can ask this question, it is increasingly trampled upon, the prohibition of aggression reduced to a dead letter. Instead of law, an attempt to use naked and brutal force. We are at a turning point in history, a time when the decisions made today will have consequences for decades to come. And all of us need to be aware of this. And all of us are taking responsibility for this. That is why now, as a community of democratic states, or those aspiring to be democratic states, we must view the current situation as a battlefield for principles whose observance may determine the future of our civilization. Ladies and gentlemen, I think this is the last moment to take concrete action. Ladies and gentlemen, Russia's aggression against Ukraine is not just a regional conflict. It is a test of whether the principles on which the UN is based will stand the test of time, or whether they will succumb to the weight of the imperial and colonial ambitions of a state which considers itself above the law and which has repeatedly ignored the resolutions of the assembly, of this assembly, of other assemblies. And to a certain extent, all of us take responsibility for that. Further repeating the words about peace and security, which have to be spoken out loud, but which should be followed by concrete action. Moscow speaks of the need to address, and I quote, the root causes of the conflict. I share this view, but I believe that the root causes of Russian aggression are primarily ideological. Russia refers to an imperial vision that treats entire nations as a colonial property. It denies them subjectivity on a regular basis, claiming that they are artificial constructs, and it justifies the invasion as a historical correction. And ladies and gentlemen, in Poland, in Central Europe, in Eastern Europe, we know all of that. We have known it for at least 86 years. It is the same set of notions which appears also in the 21st century during our discussions, plenary sessions, and assemblies. To us in Central Europe and in Eastern Europe, this set of notions is nothing new. Whether we are talking about Poland, the Republic of Poland, in the first half of the 20th century, or whether we are talking about Ukraine today. As a historian, I view the present also through the lens of the past. That is natural. After centuries of conquests, wars, partitions, deportations, rapes, and crimes, in the 20th and in the 21st century, Russia has simply not abandoned its imperial ambitions. One of my great predecessors, the late President Lech Kaczynski, understood this perfectly well when he spoke in front of the Georgian parliament in 2008. His words, spoken at that time, have stood the test of time. President Lech Kaczynski said, ladies and gentlemen, today Georgia, tomorrow Ukraine, the day after tomorrow the Baltic states, and later, perhaps, it will be time for my country, for Poland. When Russia attacked Georgia, it was not clear to everyone that this was only the beginning of the Kremlin's new imperialism. Unfortunately, the wind of history, which we know and understand so well in Poland, is beginning to blow again. Once again, we are experiencing Russian imperialism also on our soil in Poland. 2 weeks ago, on the night of September 9th to 10th, the Russian drones attacked the territory of a NATO member state and the territory of Poland. A dozen or so drones violated my country's borders deliberately, because I assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that this was not a coincidence. It happened on orders issued in the capital of a country which is a permanent member of the Security Council. As a result, For the first time since World War II, Poland was forced to open fire on hostile objects over our territory. And rest assured, ladies and gentlemen, as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces and as President of Poland, that Poland will always react adequately and it stands ready to defend its territory. Poles, ladies and gentlemen, were not scared of the Soviets in 1920, and they defended the European civilization. They defended the Soviets in 1920. Polish people and the countries of Central Europe did not give up their spirit of freedom and sovereignty for 45 years of Soviet colonialism after 1945. And Polish people, as well as countries of Central and Eastern Europe, will not be scared of Russian drones either. But, ladies and gentlemen, this is not the point. The point is, how long are we going to agree to such acts of violating our international community? And that is precisely why, ladies and gentlemen, in Poland, we're allocating significant amounts to develop our defense capabilities. That is why we are building the resilience of our country, but also of our part of Europe. Since the victims of similar provocations by Russia are also the Baltic states, our friends, the Estonians, for example, as well as Romania. As a leader in the region, we are working to strengthen the close ties among the Bucharest 9 countries. And that is why we are developing cooperation within the 3 Seas initiative. As the voice of the region, we emphasize that we do not consent to Moscow's ruthless acts of provocation against us and other European nations, testing our reactions and intimidating our societies. We do not agree to that. Distinguished delegates, neo-imperial and neo-colonial Russia is attempting to destroy the architecture of international security before our eyes. It violates international law, reinforces divisions, and strives to revive the concert of powers. Many countries present in this hall today are well aware of the tragedy of borders drawn by force and decisions taken over the heads of nations. Historical experiences, often so difficult for my country, shows that lasting peace cannot be built on rewarding aggression. We cannot agree to territorial integrity and sovereignty being violated. Russia's current actions do not indicate a willingness to pursue genuine peace, declarations of dialogue, and this is something we know as well, are accompanied by military offensives and attacks more attacks, with victims being civilians, including children. Always when Moscow says peace, what it actually means is surrender of the one who it considers its enemy. Russia needs to end the war and accept full responsibility for it. Holding Russia accountable should be our common duty. The perpetrators of all international crimes must be tried before competent courts. And I hope this is going to be the case soon, and that we are going to meet in the coming years, also during my presidency, and discuss things which should be obvious for all of us. That is why Poland supports the work of the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court, and endorses the idea of establishing a special ad hoc tribunal to try the perpetrators of aggression. For no war can be profitable for the aggressors. Wars cannot pay off to the aggressors, also in terms of economy. States and nations deserve full compensation also from those who started the Second World War. Because if we want to build a community of states, of democratic states, a common European Union, then we have to agree together that war must not pay off in terms of economy to any aggressor. Ladies and gentlemen, as I mentioned, we are currently facing a whole range of global and local challenges. The eyes of the world, and ours too, are currently looking at the Middle East. Poland, like many other countries in the world, is following with concern the situation in this region, in the Middle East, where, as a result of the brutal attacks by Hamas on October the 7th, 2023, the conflict has escalated. Israel, like any other country, has the right to self-defense. Actions undertaken by Israel, however, must comply with international law, including international humanitarian law. Poland continues to advocate for a two-state solution to the conflict in the Middle East, in such a way as to give both the Palestinians and the Israelis the right to live in peace and security. Poland consistently supports international efforts to improve the situation in the Middle East and calls on the UN to take action. Ladies and gentlemen, Poland has no colonial past, which is why we are a reliable and trustworthy partner for Asian and African countries. What is more, we ourselves, we Poles, were victims of colonial policies pursued by superpowers, so we understand perfectly well the instruments used by neo-imperial powers, and we do not consent to them destabilizing certain regions of the world. As President of the Republic of Poland, I will pay particular attention to developing our cooperation with various regions of the world. I'm referring to the African continent. We can all see how the ongoing wars, conflicts, and terrorist attacks undermine the efforts of proud African nations to live and develop in safe and just conditions. The world must stand with all those affected by insecurity and help them restore peace. We do not consent to neo-imperial powers destabilizing, for instance, the Sahel, in order to arbitrarily manage global migration flows or apply migratory pressure, nor do we consent to international criminal groups profiting from human trafficking and slave labor. We also want, and it is obvious as Poland, to develop relations with the countries of Asia and the Pacific. The role of this region in shaping the international order in the 21st century has significantly grown. This dynamic economic development is, however, accompanied by growing geopolitical tensions, which affects stability, prosperity, and security also in other regions of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, as Polish people, we are concerned about the negative impact of global crises. But as President of Poland, I want to say openly here in front of this international community that we are also deeply concerned and we are aware of the mistakes made by our Western partners, friends, and neighbors. Yes, I agree with President Donald Trump that in recent years, and that is something that we were warning against as Poles, and this was the signal sent also by Central European countries, Eastern European countries. Europe is deep in ideological madness. This led to bad decisions on migration. This led to green craziness, green madness, the Green Deal, which is destroying economic markets and also agricultural markets. Yes, the very same Europe, our friends and our partners with whom we want to build a common European Union. For many years, we're subsidizing the Russian Federation buying Russian cheap gas. Ladies and gentlemen, in Poland as well as in Central Europe, we know all of that, and we are glad whenever the leaders of the European countries, Western European countries, draw conclusions and when they listen to our voice. Ladies and gentlemen, development and humanitarian aid are an integral part of our country's foreign policy in terms of building global peace, security, and development. We see it as a joint investment in our future, security, stability, and prosperity. We are present with our support in many areas in Africa, in Eastern Europe, and in the Middle East. Distinguished delegates, Poland, a co-founder of the United Nations, is the world's 20th largest economy and a country which has successfully transformed itself over the past 30 years from a developing country into a developed country and from a centrally planned economy into a market economy. This unique experience allows us to make a significant contribution to UN discussions on development, combining the perspectives of the global East and the global West, as well as North and South. Given our potential and experience, we consistently seek to participate in the works of the G20, a format that serves as a bridge in these turbulent times. We also hope that the invitation to cooperate and to participate in the next summit of the group issued by the United States of America, for which I'm grateful to President Donald Trump, will translate into Poland's permanent presence in this community. Ladies and gentlemen, human rights are one of the three main pillars on which the United Nations system is based. We cannot talk about true peace if we do not protect human rights of everyone, of every person without exception. Peace is not only an absence of armed conflicts, it is also justice, equality, and respect for human dignity. Therefore, the protection of human rights must be a priority in any process of building peace and security. We can clearly see dramatic consequences of the Russian aggression, also in terms of human rights and humanitarian issues. Our priority, the priority of Poland, of Polish people, is also the situation of human rights in Belarus. We must firmly defend human rights also in the most fundamental dimension. I'm speaking about the right to life of the defenseless, from conception to natural death. We are protecting our families as the place of happiness, love, and bringing up children. We are speaking up as Poland in a loud voice for one of the most persecuted groups in the world, Christians. We consider the Human Rights Council to be the main human rights body within the United Nations system, playing a key role in ensuring compliance with human rights standards. That is why Poland has submitted its candidacy for membership of the Human Rights Council for the period 2029-2031. Our candidacy reflects our commitment to promoting and protecting human rights around the world. Distinguished Mr. President, Your Excellencies, esteemed delegates, the United Nations was established 80 years ago. This anniversary shows how far we have come, but also how many challenges still lie ahead. Today we know that international cooperation is not an option, it is a necessity for all of us. It is unacceptable that aggressors begin to march with impunity through other people's territories and perpetrators of war crimes sleep peacefully without accountability every day. Let me remind you that after World War II, there was no room for relativizing crimes, at least in case of the most important commanders who gave orders. There was Nuremberg. There was a court, there was a name and a family name, there was a charge and a sentence, because it was not just about revenge, it was about principles, And today it's also about principles to make sure that crime is not rewarded and that the law is never replaced by force. Today, we must return to that spirit. We must build an international system of accountability that will not hesitate to call evil by its name, regardless of the flag it bears on its shoulder. We must make it clear there are borders, there are human rights, there is international law, and anyone who violates it should face severe consequences. But it is not going to happen by itself, ladies and gentlemen, for the world order is not given once and for all. It depends precisely on us, on the governments, institutions, but most importantly, on societies. As one of the Nobel Peace Prize laureates once said, neutrality helps the oppressor always, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Let these words be not just a warning, but also a call to action. To action here and now. Thank you for your attention.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Poland. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Daniel Francisco Chapo, President of the Republic of Mozambique. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you so much. Your Excellency, Madam President of the 81st session of the United Nations General Assembly, Your Excellency, Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Excellency, heads of state and the government present here, distinguished head of delegations, ladies and gentlemen, it is for us an honor to address for the first time as the President of the Republic of Mozambique in a very important moment, both for Mozambique and for the Organization of the United Nations. I'm saying this because we celebrate 50 years of our national independence, 50 years of our admission as full members of the UN, and 80 years of these big organizations. Therefore, we would like to congratulate the President, Her Excellent Madam Annalene Baerbock, for her presidency of the 80th session, as well as commend the work of the outgoing President, His Excellency Philemon Yang, that did a wonderful work. We cannot fail to pay tribute to the Secretary General of the United Nations, Engineer Antonio Guterres, for his tireless advocacy in the defense of multilateralism, for the attention to Africa's priorities, and for his vision in launching the UN 80 initiative. Today, 8 years after its creation, we are pleased to witness the progress that the United Nations has helped to achieve. The independence of the Republic of Mozambique, as well as the many African countries and other continents of this planet. This is one of just one of the evidence of this legacy of the UN. Despite multiple challenges that the UN faces, it remains firm at the forefront of the global processes, which is why we emphasize that any reform effort aimed at making it more response and with better capacity to address contemporary realities will only be complete when we include the reform of the Security Council of the UN. Your Excellencies, the year 2025 has tested the limits of multilateralism with the United Nations at the epicenter. We have witnessed the intensification and escalation of conflicts and growing sense in the whole world. And we also see a growing sense of impunity. The ongoing conflicts in various corners of the world and the crisis remind us that the promise to save the future generations from the scourge of war, written in the letter of 1945 Charter, remains unfulfilled. 8 years of building multilateralism institutions, safeguards, and principles that have governed global affairs are now at risk. The result is clear. Wars are multiplying, the climate crisis is worsening, debt are mounting, tariffs are rising, the disillusion is spreading, and above all, the nuclear spectra is returning. Added to these threats, we also have the economic consequence of successful crisis in the world. We are talking about the pandemic of COVID-19, the war in Europe, in the Middle East, and the wars in Africa. From the rising of commodity prices to financial volatility globally. All of this generates unsustainable debt and ever-deepening inequalities in the society. We are witnessing a concerning setback of the international commitment. With only 5 years to go until 2030, the agenda of SDG is at risk because the targets have not been met and we still have a long to go. And the climate crisis accelerates and intensifies all other crises that we know. Droughts are turning up the population with famine, cyclones into humanitarian disasters, displaces into despair, which is exploited by unscrupulous stakeholders. It was in this context that the historic opinion of the International Court of Justice of 23rd of July 2025 unequivocally reaffirmed that the states have binding legal obligations to protect the climate and the environment from the greenhouse gas emissions. This is a milestone of universal significance. For countries such as Mozambique, which bears no historical responsibility for the climate crisis, but are amongst those that are the hardest hit by its consequences. Droughts, cyclones, floods, inundations. This decision is very important. It's a legal principle for us. It's a call to climate justice. It's a call to global solidarity and immediate actions from the side of all of us. The environmental crisis is compounded by the technological challenge. Artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies offer extraordinary opportunities, but also serious risks of exclusion, manipulation of the society, and even militarization throughout autonomous weapons. These advances pose new challenges to the defense and human dignity, justice, and labor. As long as we do not fully understand how these models work, we cannot entrust them critical tasks without robust safeguards in place. Otherwise, we are going to destroy the world. For that reason, Mozambique advocates a technological and climate diplomacy capable of regulating risk and democratizing benefits through genuine transfer and sharing of knowledge, of technology, so that the science and technology are not factors of exclusion, but rather instruments of climate justice and inclusive development in the world. Faced with these interconnected challenges, our continent, Africa, can and must play an active role in defining international rules and standards, formulating principles and scientific ethics, and determining research priorities, ensuring that technology innovation is always at the service of the humanity and not at the service of destruction of the humanity. In face of this crisis, the isolation is not the answer. Contrastive dialogue and strengthening of multilateralism are. The Pact for the Future, adopted in 2024, offers concrete and innovative responses for a launching of multilateralism adapted to challenges to the 21st century. Mozambique, as an African country with vast natural resources and unparalleled culture wealth, has distinguished itself in the promotion and strengthening of democracy in the African continent. Since we moved forward with political pluralism, we've been working tirelessly to consolidate the foundation of a robust democratic system, holding regular and transparent elections that reflect the will of people and ensure that every Mozambican citizen has the voice and a say in the decisions that shape the future of our nation in Mozambique. Indeed, our presence in this podium is a result of a free and a transparent process of the Mozambican people from Rovuma to Maputo, from Zumbo to Indico, and in the diaspora. We have historically had an ongoing commitment to dialogue and building bridges between different political and social actors. This commitment to the dialogue was crucial for the lasting peace achieved after decades of conflicts and for the political stability that we enjoy today in Mozambique. Currently, Mozambique stands out for its ongoing efforts to promote an inclusive national dialogue, which the public consultation phase was launched on the 10th September. We are working to ensure that all the sectors of the society, regardless of their origin, political, societal, economic position, they all should be heard and have their concerns taken into account in the national decision. This process will not only strengthen the Mozambican democracy, but also ensure that the country development is truly reflected the needs and aspirations of all Mozambicans without exception. We do believe that the true strength of a nation, it does not lie only in its ability to resolve conflicts, but it also in its ability to promote in a peaceful and constructive manner. We are proud of the progress we have made so far, and we reaffirm our commitment to continue advancing as an example of democracy in Africa, of peaceful coexistence in the African continent and in the world. We are proud to have promoted during our term the Security Council, where we were non-permanent members, the presidential statement on Africa about the role of Africa in global affairs, as well as to have contributed for the historic resolution 1719-2023, which paved the way for the predictable and sustainable financing of the operations of support to peace in African Union through United nation treasure. This milestone confirmed that Africa is not only a beneficiary of multilateral order, but also an indispensable actor in the reforms and revitalization. It is in this sense that Mozambique will keep defending a stronger African voice with 2 permanent seats on the Security Council and a greater weight in the decision of international financial institutions internationally. A new global financial architecture capable of alleviating debt, mobilizing financial resources for the sustainable development and climate action, as well as correcting historical asymmetries. An inclusive multilateralism which preserves intergovernmental character of the UN without allowing that this organization can become an assembly of shareholders dominated by the richest. We want to reiterate equally the fact that we want to have 2 states like Palestine living side by side with peace with Israel as the only fair way, legitimate and long-lasting, so that we can have the aspiration of both people. I would like to congratulate the countries that have recently decided to recognize Palestine, the same right that was given to Israel, contributing to reinforce legitimacy and the fact that we are going to have the solution for both states. The same way, I would like to reaffirm our firm opposition against the coercive measurements that are unilaterally that are excluding the people, Cuba to Venezuela, Zimbabwe to other countries in clear violation of the UN Charter against the principles of justice, solidarity, and the international law.
Minhas senhoras,
Ladies and gentlemen, the topic chosen for this session is like it's better to be together. 8 years and counting for peace, development of human rights could not be more timely. It is intrinsically linked to the events of this week where we are having this high level in the UN, the celebration of Beijing Conference on Women, the Climate Summit, the first biennial summit for sustainable and inclusive and resilient global economy mandated by the Pact for the Future, the celebration of youth, the elimination of nuclear weapons, and the meeting on global health and well-being. All these meetings reaffirm the vitality and the centrality of the UN and conveys the same truth. What unites us as a humanity is much greater than what divides us. We are different people, but we share the same earth. We profess different creeds, but we all aspire to the same dignity. We speak different languages, but we share a single destiny. In fact, today, where we are today, we all know the date of birth, but no one knows the day they are going to die. And this is a clear sign that we all are equal like human beings. Today, the creed that we need is not one exclusion. We all need to be included, not excluded. Not isolation, but cooperation. Not unilateralism, but multilateralism based on solidarity. We need today, all of us, to have a renewed faith in the humanity's collective ability to face the common challenges of Gaia, our common home. The world is at a real turning point. We all feel this. Either we deliver the 23rd agenda that we've written it ourselves, or we will have to accept seeing a relegated and failed promise And for this, goodwill is not enough. Honoring the principle of common responsibility and this differentiality is important. We need resources on a scale. We need to work in a smarter way to align mandate with national priorities for each of us, to invest in data, technology, institutional capacity, and most of all, ensure that Africa has a full seat at the table where decisions are taken for its future. The message of Mozambique is very clear. We want partnerships based on mutual respect and shared value. To paraphrase the late President Samora Moises Machel, the president of the Popular Republic of Mozambique at the time, today Republic of Mozambique, international solidarity is not an act of charity. It is an act of unity amongst allies. The 80th anniversary of the UN invites all of us to renew our spirit of solidarity, international solidarity, and human solidarity. The challenges before us are enormous, but we are indeed better together, as the topic of the UN says. And if it is true that each generation inherits the world from the previous one, it is also true that each generation has the duty of leaving a better world for the next generation. This is the guidance principle of the Agenda 2030. It is the spirit of the Pact of the Future, and it is the reason why we have this organization, the United Nations, to transform the hope of the people in the world into actions, solidarity into concrete results for the people, so that we may have the courage, all of us in the planet, to reform with wisdom, learn from our mistakes, and the determination to offer peace, development, and human rights to everyone, all human beings in the planet. To conclude, I would like to say that Mozambique counts on the UN, and the UN can count on Mozambique. Thank you so much, everyone, and wish you success. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Mozambique. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Luong Kong, State President of the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Madam President, I would like to extend my heartfelt congratulations to Madam Annalena Baerbock on her election as President of the 80th session of the UN General Assembly. I am fully confident that with her experience and able leadership, this session will be a great success. I would also like to pay tribute to Mr. Philemon Young, President of the 79th session, and Secretary General Antonio Guterres for their contributions. Madam President, over the past 80 years, in spite of a multitude of challenges, the UN has stood as the embodiment of humanity's aspiration and collective commitment to peace, cooperation, and development, grounded in the universal values of human rights, national independence, equality, democracy, and social progress. Multilateral cooperation has brought forth remarkable achievements, especially in preventing wars, fostering peace and cooperation, building friendships, reducing poverty and curbing diseases, improving living standards,
and advancing science and technology at an unprecedented pace. Yet today, we find ourselves in a profoundly changing world facing unprecedented acute challenges. Local wars, conflicts, arms races, and the use or threat of force in the international relations are escalating at an alarming rate. Non traditional security challenges are exerting heavy tolls on all countries and communities. The global governance, trading, and economic systems are becoming fragmented and volatile. Multilateralism itself is under strain from strategic rivalry among major powers, unilateralism, and a sharp decline in political will and necessary resources. This is precisely the time to stand united and together promote the irreplaceable role of multilateralism and a rules based international order, with the UN at its heart. Madam President, as a nation that has endured immense pain and losses from wars, Vietnam treasures more than most the priceless values of peace. The spirit of peace, amity, compassion, and altruism is deeply woven into our national identity. This forms the bedrock for us to overcome previous sufferings, mend old wounds, shelve the past, and look towards the future with the hope to become a friend and reliable partner to all nations around the world. Peace is both the goal and the prerequisite for our journey towards a stable, just, democratic, and prosperous future. Honoring the value of peace and driving robust transformation for a sustainable future is the sincere message that Vietnam wishes to share with the international community on the occasion of the UN's 80th anniversary. In this spirit, allow me to share my reflections as follows. First, honoring the value of peace requires concrete actions rather than just words. We must reaffirm the role and primacy of international law as the cornerstone for peace and equal relations among nations. All countries should clearly demonstrate their responsibility towards upholding international law and the UN Charter, and respecting such principles as independence, sovereignty, territorial integrity, non interference, non use or threat of force, and peaceful settlement of disputes. Vietnam welcomes recent efforts to achieve peace and reconciliation, which have yielded important results in many regions, such as the peace agreements between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and between Armenia and Azerbaijan. We value and support all diplomatic efforts and hope that they will lead to peaceful solutions to regional and global security issues. We must nurture and practice a culture of peace by building trust, enhancing international cooperation and solidarity, promoting dialogue, listening and understanding, respecting differences, and cultivating friendship among nations. On this occasion, Vietnam calls for ceasefires and an end to all acts of violence, protection of civilians, and facilitation of humanitarian access in conflict zones. Vietnam welcomes the recent recognition of the State of Palestine by more countries and urges the international community to act swiftly to end the humanitarian crisis faced by the Palestinian people. We also reaffirm our solidarity with the state and people of Cuba and call upon the United States to lift its embargoes against Cuba and remove Cuba from the list of state sponsors of terrorism. We must further promote the role of regional organizations in promoting peace, cooperation, and development. International efforts for peace and development will be truly effective when driven by regional organizations in line with the particularities of each region and countries. As an active ASEAN member state, Vietnam is proud of ASEAN's growing strength and its centrality in the Asia Pacific's security and development architecture. Most recently, ASEAN contributed to the ceasefire agreement between Cambodia and Thailand, and we are committed to upholding ASEAN's core values of solidarity, consensus, and unity in diversity, building a resilient, inclusive, and sustainable ASEAN community, and effectively implementing the five-point consensus on Myanmar. We shall also strive to maintain peace, stability, security, safety, and freedom of navigation in the South China Sea in accordance with international law, particularly the UNCLOS 1982, while fully implementing the Declaration on the Conduct of Parties and working to finalize the Code of Conduct in the area. Second, in a world at a historic crossroads, we must transform boldly to shape a sustainable future. Global governance institutions, particularly the UN and international monetary and financial bodies, must undergo vigorous reforms to become more adaptive, ensure equitability, transparency, coherence, and efficiency in their operations, and better respond to the needs of all countries and peoples. Vietnam welcomes and supports efforts to reform the UN, including the UNAT initiative, to build an UN 2.0 that is leaner, more coherent, effective, and efficient. This initiative must follow a holistic and integrated approach, being driven by member states. Vietnam stands ready to share its experience in successfully implementing the Delivering as One initiative of UN organizations in the country. We must build sustainable development models based on digital transformation and green transition, two mutually reinforcing drivers that can spark a sweeping revolution. As they stand for convergence of scientific and technological advancements and environmental sustainability. To optimize this dual transformation, countries must formulate relevant master plans, invest strongly in R&D, train high-quality human resources, and develop green technology infrastructure. Furthermore, it is of great importance to advance international cooperation on technology transfer and mobilization of green finance to ensure that no one is left behind. Developed countries must take responsibility in sharing and transferring technology to developing and underdeveloped countries. In this digital era, societies are undergoing transformation of an unprecedented pace, scope, and depth, accompanied by rising challenges such as poverty, inequality, unemployment, and a crisis of information and trust. We must ensure that social transformation remains a human centered process, with focus on such priorities as comprehensively eradicating poverty, providing full and decent employment, and ensuring social justice and inclusion. Vietnam hopes that the Second World Summit for Social Development this November will deliver important outcomes and add momentum to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Madam President, from the ruins of wars, once poor, outdated, and isolated, Vietnam has made historic progress. We now enjoy diplomatic relations with 194 countries, strategic and comprehensive partnerships with 38 nations, and membership in over 70 international organizations. Vietnam is now among the world's 32 largest economies and top 20 trading nations. The lives of over 100 million Vietnamese citizens have vastly improved, with a sharp drop in multidimensional poverty rate. We have met the Millennium Development Goals ahead of schedule and are striving to fulfill international commitments and are on course toward two strategic centennial goals: becoming a modern, industrialized, upper middle income developing country by 2030 and a developed high income nation by 2045. On behalf of the state and people of Vietnam, I express heartfelt gratitude to the UN and its agencies, member states, and partners who have been working with us and supported us on this journey of development. Guided by the spirit of self reliance, resilience, and solidarity for the common cause, Vietnam pursues an independent, self reliant foreign policy for peace, cooperation, and development, while diversifying and multilateralizing our external relations and strive to further expand and deepen our international integration in a more proactive manner, with a strong commitment to being a friend, a reliable partner, and a responsible member of the international community. Vietnam will continue to make every effort and stand with all nations to shoulder our shared responsibilities, overcome challenges, and foster transformative changes to build a world of peace, stability, prosperity, and sustainability, delivering happiness and well being to all. Vietnam is actively preparing to assume the presidency of the 11th Review Conference of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons in 2026, and we look forward to the valuable support of member states for our candidacies to the UN Human Rights Council for the 2026-2028 term and to the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea for the 2026-2035 term. We particularly look forward to welcoming you all to Hanoi on the 25th of October for the signing ceremony of the UN Convention against Cybercrime. I thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the State President of the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, the Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Juan Manuel Gonzalez Lourenço, President of the Republic of Angola. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Your Excellency, the President of the General Assembly, Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, Excellencies, Heads of Delegations, ladies and gentlemen, I stand before Your Excellencies in my capacity as President of the Republic of Angola and current chairperson of the African Union to speak about my country, to share our perspective on the evolution of the events unfolding in this increasingly troubled world, and to discuss matters concerning Africa, a continent that mobilizes our energies and efforts as we seek solutions to finally awake it once for all towards development. Allow me to extend my congratulations to Her Excellency Anneliane Baerbock on her election to the distinguished office of the President of the United Nations General Assembly, convinced that her experience and the knowledge she has accumulated through the various functions she has performed with great mastery will ensure the success of the work she has taken on since the beginning of this month of September. I also would like to congratulate her predecessor, His Excellency Philemon Yang, for the assertive manner in which he presided over the General Assembly during the past year, having devoted his utmost dedication to ensuring that this body should operate with commendable efficiency, a fact that rightfully deserves our collective recognition in light of the positive outcomes achieved throughout his tenure. I cannot fail to acknowledge His Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, for the role that he has so ably played with a profound sense of commitment underpinned by his admirable qualities as a man of dialogue and peace amid prevailing geopolitical complexities. Madam President, Excellencies, 80 years have elapsed since, compelled by imperatives of that era, a group of nations and their respective leaders took the wise decision to establish the United Nations organization, which from that moment, through both turbulent and peaceful instances, had succeeded in fulfilling its great mission of maintaining the global peace and stability, contributing to the advancement of humanity and to preserve and deepen respect for human rights. This is a great achievement of the peoples of our planet, which cannot and must not be neglected and underestimated by any power, political leaders, or by anyone, lest by magnifying egocentric visions and interests, we forfeit the benefits of peace bequeathed to us by women and men who, over time, led us so far in an environment of harmony and global understanding. This journey has not always been linear, yet, in the most critical moments, prudence has prevailed over the Western impulses of large-scale conflict, and this has been possible solely through continual dialogue, which has proven to be the only factor capable of bridging differences, overcoming obstacles, and appeasing even the most troubled and belligerent spirits. Today, these lessons from the past are of great value and must serve as our sole references that guide us toward solution to the conflicts in Africa, Europe, the Middle East, Latin America, in Asia, and wherever they may arise. Under the context of uncertainty in which we celebrate the 80th anniversary of the United Nations, the theme, Better Together, 80 years and beyond for peace, development, and human rights, holds a significance that compels us to reflect upon the profound meaning of the appeal by Her Excellency the President of the General Assembly for the renewal of multilateralism and solidarity in action within a framework of collective and complementary undertakings by a more agile, effective, and responsible UN as envisaged in the roadmap of the Secretary General's Initiative 80. In light of these perspectives, it is urgent that we revitalize the United Nations and lift it from the complex situation in which it finds itself currently in order to restore the active role that he has always played, a strongly valuable role that, during the Cold War, gave us assurance of never feeling as close to a global conflict as we do at this moment amid the profound dissonance prevailing in international relations. The main world powers appear to be turning their backs on one another, distancing themselves from even the most basic points of convergence that would allow them to remain committed to, above all, to the dialogue and concerted action. Today's challenges confront us with a choice, either to do everything in our power to preserve peace or to face war with all its consequences, thus jeopardizing the future of humanity. Those world powers that in the past played a crucial role in the liberation of Europe and its people from the clutches of Nazism and fascism, as well as in the liberation of Africa and its people from the apartheid regime in South Africa, cannot today act differently by aggressing other countries, invading and annexing foreign territories, nor by financing or organizing upheavals that could cause the, to the overthrow of legitimate governments as we currently witness in our own continent. With this dangerous precedent, no regional, continental, or global institution will henceforth have the moral authority to call any state to reason when it breaches the principles that govern the UN Charter and international law. We Africans from countries that endured centuries of colonization perhaps understand better than anyone else the importance of peace, for we have had to face daily struggles to provide our people with food, clean water, healthcare, education, and other fundamental necessities. This experience engenders heightened sensitivity to the harmful impact that insecurity and instability have on the attainment of our goals and developmental projects. This reality is further exacerbated by numerous conflicts and wars afflicting countries and regions across the globe from which we had hoped to find cooperation and fruitful exchanges, so that together we might overcome our difficulties and contribute with our immense resources and capabilities to global prosperity. It is upon this foundation that the Republic of Angola has sought to make an earnest and genuine contribution to resolving the conflict in the Sahel region, in Sudan, and in Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo, regarding which our efforts established a negotiation framework with peace solution that regrettably did not come to fruition in December 2024 as anticipated, but nonetheless remains a valid platform for further efforts being undertaken with the aim of bringing a definitive end to that conflict. Madam President, Excellencies, that conflict and so many others that we recall are to a large extent the result of passivity of the United Nations member states, who have often revealed themselves to be ineffective in the face of invasion of third-party territories and interference in internal affairs of sovereign countries that occurred over the recent years and have not provoked a firm, resolute, and assertive reaction, therefore have become fait accompli that lie at the very center of the major tensions that the world is currently experiencing. The consequences of these are very evident before our eyes in the Middle East, where the systematic failure to comply with the relevant UN Security Council resolution regarding the creation of the State of Palestine has perpetuated a conflict that worsens with each day passing and appears to have no end in sight in face of disproportionate and violent response and retaliation by Israel, which, while having a right to exist as a state and to demand the release of those still held hostage from the tragic events of October 7th, must not, however, be allowed to pursue in Palestine and particularly in the Gaza Strip a policy of extermination of a whole people. The Palestinian people, who must not be conflated with Hamas, for there is no peoples and certainly no children who are terrorists, has precisely the same right to an independent sovereign state where they may assert their culture, safeguard for the future, and provide predictable and secure prospects for their youth. The concerns surrounding that conflict grow ever more severely in the face of silence, hesitations, and timid response of the international community, which seems to legitimize the expansion of war to other countries in the region, inexorably corroding the authority of the United Nations. There is nothing more serious than the exclusion of the delegation of Palestine from this forum, where it should rightly have the opportunity to make its voice heard as member state in accordance with the terms of the host agreement. The failure to guarantee the presence of the President of the Palestinian Authority at this General Assembly sends a profoundly negative signal as it encourages the continuation of genocide we all are witnessing helplessly and with impunity, which delays the resolution of the issue and complicates the efforts that have been made to bring an end to that intricate conflict. We strongly condemn this unilateral position, which is contrary to the principles that govern the United Nations, even as we urge unconditional lifting of the unjust and prolonged embargo against Cuba, which has dire consequences for the economy and the living conditions of the Cuban people who struggle daily to withstand a punishment rejected by the international community as a whole. Cuba, which played an important role in the struggle of African peoples, leading to the overthrow of the racist and inhuman apartheid regime in South Africa, and by virtue of this was a signatory to the New York Peace Accord of December 22nd, 1988, which brought freedom to the South African people and led to the independence of Namibia, cannot be arbitrarily and unilaterally considered a state sponsor of terrorism in light of the relevant United Nations resolutions. This model of conduct by a small group of countries, which does not conform to the even minimum acceptable standards of global coexistence, is at the root of the unilateral and subjective sanctions imposed also on Zimbabwe and Venezuela, measures that produce no other results other than the suffering of population who, in an act of great patriotism, ultimately unite themselves in the defense of their nations. Madam President, Excellencies, the authority of this organization, whose foundation is the UN Charter and international law, must be urgently restored without narratives that highlight a logic of double standards, so that just solutions may be sought for the war in Ukraine, or so that solutions proposed by the meeting held in Alaska may be reinforced. Ukraine, being a European country, after President Trump met with President Putin on a pragmatic manner, and without prejudice to the need for direct negotiation between Russia and Ukraine, one would expect that European leaders, in an interest of Europe's peace and security, would likewise seek direct dialogue not only with the President Zelensky, but also with President Putin. We cannot afford to squander this opportunity, for otherwise we risk witnessing an escalation of unpredictable proportions and consequences not only in Europe, where all active stakeholders must abandon the perilous calculation rooted in the notion of military victory through the weakening of adversaries' capabilities. It is in the light of face of the present challenges and the ongoing global crisis that the United Nations must re-emerge and become more proactive, lest its role as the main entity for global governance be diminished and be transformed into an institution incapable of ensuring world peace. Therefore, it is our responsibility as states and sovereign nations not to allow the UN to succumb. The United Nations, in its present form, is the sole organization with capacity to act on behalf of all of us in the quest for worldwide consensus in favor of peace, with the legitimacy to call to reason those member states who undermine its foundational principles in their conduct on the international stage. For this reason, we must preserve it at all cost and adapt it to the realities of the contemporary world through the urgently required reforms. In this most particular regard, I advocate for the reform of the Security Council in line with common African positions set forth in the Ezoline Consensus and in the CERT Declaration adopted 20 years ago, which called for 2 permanent seats and 5 non-permanent seats for the African continent in an expanded Security Council that is more representative and consistent with the contemporary geopolitical realities. Without this indispensable step, which has already experienced an unjustified delay, we will not be able to ensure the realization of the Pact for the Future adopted last year, which recognized the urgent need to endow the United Nations with a more democratic and balanced Security Council. This pact represents a significant opportunity to revitalize multilateralism, rendering it more inclusive and capable of serving as a broader foundation for discussion on critical issues facing today's world. Amongst these, I wish to underscore, alongside many other relevant issues, the issue of financing for development and climate challenge. With regard to matters concerning support for development, there remains much to be discussed, but also it's appropriate to recognize the recent progress achieved with the adoption of the Seville commitment reached at the 4th Conference on Financing for Development, which advocates the urgent reform of international financial institutions so as to render them more representative, inclusive, and equipped to address the pressing needs of the developing countries, especially those of Africa. I am convinced that this instrument, combined with the Pact for the Future, the United Nations Fiscal Convention, and the United Nations Debt Convention, still under discussion, will together serve as a political, financial, and normative platform that will provide significant momentum to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Madam President, Excellencies, it is essential that we confront the climate crisis as the greatest existential threat of our time, which can only be overcome through joint, coordinated, and united action. In view of the ongoing increase of global warming and the increasingly violent, frequent natural disasters, it has become imperative that the nations that which derived the greatest benefits from industrial and economic development in the past fully assume today the historical responsibility, ensuring, as an act of climate justice, adequate financing, technology transfer, and support for adaptation and mitigation for the developing countries. The countries with only residual share in greenhouse gas emissions are those that disproportionately and virtually alone face the impact of climate change, global warming, and their devastating effects on agriculture, food security, and public health. In view of such evidence, and the responsibilities arising therefrom, Angola remains steadfastly committed to the Paris Agreement and to the implementing adaptation and mitigation measures in an alignment with the United Nations 2030 Agenda and the African Union 2063 Agenda, which enshrine the consensus concerning the mobilization of predictable, affordable climate financing intended to ensure a just energy transition capable of protecting the most vulnerable communities. This cross-cutting theme, which demands increasingly heightened sense of responsibility both within the scope of public agendas and among major industrial corporations, will receive due attention at the forthcoming COP30 climate summit to be held shortly in Brazil, which for the second time hosts an event of this magnitude, a testament to the country's commitment and engagement with environmental issues. In 1992, in Rio de Janeiro, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change was inaugurated, a paradigm that has proven greatly beneficial for the increasingly profound discussion that endured to this day and which will assuredly, at the forthcoming conference, enable us all to take another step forward on this long journey that we must undertake to achieve the major climate goals aspired by humanity. Excellencies, 80 years after the founding of the United Nations and following the end of the Cold War, our expectation was that we would be living in a world without present uncertainties, not as perilous as that which we now witness. Until 1991, we lived in a context marked by sharp division between two ideologically opposed blocs, which nevertheless offered a more predictable framework and was less susceptible to drifting into large-scale confrontation. This flashback should not lead us to the conclusion that the global stability is only possible within a framework of rigid divisions of any kind. Rather, it should inspire us to build a system based on balanced interest and shared concern on matters pertaining to global security that fosters complementarity and all forms of convergence within an environment of multilateralism, which remains the sole pathway capable of preserving us from a true catastrophe. With these few words, I thank you for your kind attention.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Angola. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Joseph Neuma Boakai, President of the Republic of Liberia. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Madam President, Mr. Secretary General, His Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I'm honored to address the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly on behalf of the people of Liberia. 8 decades after its founding, in which Liberia was involved, our country is proud that the United Nations remains the most critical multilateral platform for international cooperation and collective action. The UN continues to employ the best framework of humanity for peace, justice, security, dignity, and shared prosperity. Madam President, please accept the congratulations from the delegation to Liberia on your assumption of the esteemed office of President of the 80th session of the General Assembly. We trust in your leadership to guide the affairs of this august body. We also extend our commendation to your predecessor for his stewardship on the 79th session, and are grateful to the Secretary General for his leadership. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, please accept the gratitude of the Liberian government and the people for the overwhelming trust demonstrated by the General Assembly members in electing Liberia to serve on the non-permanent seat of the United Nations Security Council for the 2026-2027 term. This marks Liberia's first full term on the UN Security Council, 80 years after the country signed the charter in Herbst Theater Auditorium in San Francisco. While the nameplate during this 2-year term will read Liberia, the seat, however, belongs to Africa. We are committed to ensuring that Liberia's contribution to the Security Council's discussions and the decisions are shaped by hard-earned experiences in conflict resolution, as well as our successes in peace building, democratic reform, political transition, and governance. Additionally, the collective experience of the continent will be taken into consideration. Liberia looks forward to advocating for Africa's fair representation on the UN Security Council, which can only be achieved through permanent representation as a key part of the UN Security Council reform agenda. Excellencies, when the UN was founded in 1945, nations came together in the belief that peace could only be secured through cooperation. After 2 world wars, it became a widely held conviction that nations are stronger when united than when divided. 80 years later, that conviction is being tested like never before. From wars and displacement to terrorism, threats to technological advances, climate change, and widening inequalities, today our world faces challenges that no country can solve alone. At the same time, and paradoxically,
When the world needs to strengthen multilateralism, its credibility and efficacy have been questioned. As one of the 4 African countries to sign the Charter of the United Nations, Liberia feels morally obligated to call for renewal rather than reversal of multilateralism. Reversal of multilateralism is not an option for a just and peaceful world. We call for greater inclusion, effectiveness, and respect for international law, recognizing that the credibility of the United Nations depends on our ability to act together in the service of humanity, rather than apart in the pursuit of narrow interests. Madam President, wars in Europe, Middle East, and Africa remind us that peace is often fragile and must be constantly defended. Therefore, as in 1945, Liberia once again reaffirms its commitment to the dialogue, diplomacy, and the peaceful resolution of disputes. In this spirit, Liberia supports all credible mediation efforts aimed at resolving conflict between Russia and Ukraine, as well as Israel-Palestinian conflict. Liberia stands on a common African position for the realization of the two-state solution, where Israel and Palestinians can live side by side in peace and security in accordance with international law and the relevant UN resolutions. We call on the international community to act together decisively to protect civilians, hold perpetrators of atrocities accountable, and strengthen mediation efforts. Rising from the ruins of civil war, Liberia knows all too well that human cause of conflict and importance of peace. Since 2003, Liberia has experienced 3 peaceful and orderly democratic transitions, each marked by a smooth transfer of power, making our nation safer, more stable, and more secure after over 30 years of unrest, instability, and destruction. Liberians have also worked hard to achieve this through multilateral cooperation with support from ECOWAS, the African Union, and the United Nations. Excellency, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, for Liberia, climate change is not a distant threat, but a present reality. Rising seas are eroding our coast, wild storms and heavy rain devastate communities, threaten lives and livelihoods, and exacerbate food insecurity. Yet, we are acting. We are carrying our coastal defense project, developing climate information system for early warning systems, finalizing our carbon market policies, and advancing the blue economy safety. But our efforts alone are not enough. We urge implementation of the Paris Agreement, full capitalization of the loss and damage fund, and greater global investment in adaptation and mitigation. Above all, we call for climate justice. Those who contribute the least to these crises should not be forced to suffer the most. Madam President, Excellencies, too many development nations spend more on debt servicing than on health or education. The current international financial architecture is unresponsive to this reality. making it not only outdated, but also unjust and defiant of the objectives of shared prosperity and development, the pursuit of which the United Nations was created. Liberia, therefore, joins the Global South in calling for urgent reforms to the international financial architecture to ensure fair representation, a new approach to debt servicing, and financing that supports sustainable development. Shared prosperity requires a system that truly leaves no nation behind. Excellency, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, at home, inclusive development remains our top priority. To this end, our government has launched the Arrest Agenda for Inclusive Development, which focuses on agriculture and food security, roads and infrastructure, rule of law and good governance, education and skill development, sanitation and health, tourism, technology, and innovation. The Arrest Agenda aligns with our National Vision 2030, which aims to transform Liberia into a lower middle income country and lay the foundation for a capable state by 2030. Through this agenda, we are committed to improving the livelihoods, reducing inequality, and ensuring that every Liberian benefits from the dividends of peace and development. We are taking tangible steps to improve governance by implementing accountability and anti-terrorism corruption measures such as asset declaration. We are strengthening institutional capacity to promote integrity, transparency, and improve public service delivery. Everywhere has endured some of the darkest chapters of human suffering, having experienced one of the most brutal conflicts in recent history. Over the past 2 decades, we have remained firmly on the path of recovery, working to heal our nation and rebuild from the painful legacy of war. My government has taken deliberate, meaningful steps toward national reconciliation. These include honoring the memory of the victims, supporting initiative for memorialization, and upholding the commitment to justice and the rule of law. While we recognize that these efforts are complex and challenging, they are essential steps towards achieving lasting peace and genuine national healing. May I now take the opportunity to renew my government's request for the international support and assistance in establishing a war and economic crimes court, which will further the Liberian people's aspiration for national healing and reconciliation through justice. Madam President, for the United Nations to remain relevant and practical, it must adapt. Liberia therefore supports the Pact for the Future and Global Digital Compact. We also call on the UN that more responsive and reflective of today's world, using outdated 1945 solutions to tackle 2025 challenges is neither reasonable nor realistic. Regarding sustainable development goals, we agree that our collective progress is too slow. However, reaching the SDGs targets remains a vital effort as ever. We therefore urge that the timely achievement of the SDGs be treated as a global emergency. Consequently, Liberia will submit its next voluntary